Okay, great. I'm here today with Patrick from CloudRail, and we are going to talk a little bit about AWS Greengrass, right?
Mm-hmm.
What is AWS Greengrass?
So simply put, AWS Greengrass is an edge computing environment provided by AWS. So the idea really being it allows you to manage and deploy code and applications through AWS console instead of having to physically or locally connect to a device and then run some code on it, right, by yourself. So you can deploy it, you can enable it on an edge device, and then you can afterwards bring your own components, your own applications down to that device without having to be, physically present, which is obviously what we like to do as well in general. So I think that's just Greengrass in a nutshell. Obviously, you can do a lot of things with it, but that's the basic idea.
Okay, cool. So we have a device here, and this is a CloudRail.Box Max based on the Welotec EG500. And we will configure it through the CloudRail portal, and then over AWS Greengrass, we'll deploy a container that will afterwards run on this device.
Mm-hmm.
Correct?
Yes.
Perfect. Let's get started.
Yeah. So first of all, this is the device management platform, and we have a device already registered. So this down here is the Welotec device, which we want to now onboard. Well, we now want to...
This device, right?
Correct. Well, we now want to enable Greengrass. So what I do is, in the first step, I would go to the credentials manager here and add my credentials so that we can actually communicate with your AWS account. But I have already done that. So afterwards, I just go to the device I want to enable it on. Click Enable AWS IoT Greengrass down here. I can enter a name for the core device. So this is the name that will eventually appear up on your AWS account. So we just name it Welotec Test and hit Enable Greengrass. Now, what we're doing in the background is, all the API calls to your AWS account. We create the core. We download, again, certificates, credentials that we need down to the device to instantiate basically the local deployment or the local installation of Greengrass. This just takes a little while. And it also downloads the actual container, right? So we have the Greengrass container now on the device. It's currently deployed, as we can see, but we can also see that there's nothing deployed on that device right now. So we first have to actually create a deployment the first time around so that we get any device or any components onto that local deployment. But it's enabled from our side, as you can see here. What we do now is we switch over to our AWS account. If we go into Greengrass devices and core devices, we should see the Welotec test device down here.
Okay. It hasn't been there before, right? So it
Correct.
Just appeared there after you clicked in the CloudRail portal on...
Yes. So as you can also see, the status was reported 1 minute ago. So
okay.
This is just newly created. And as you can also see, there are currently no components whatsoever on the device. So what we have to do first is we have to deploy something. So we go to deployment, and we first have to go to the left to deployments. We have to create a new deployment. Now there's a few things that we have to configure with it. The name is optional. We have to say, okay, it's going to be a core device that we deploy to, and it's going to be Welotec Test. We go next, and now we can select from the public components. There is a detailed description on what exactly it is that you need to deploy. So on the device management cloud, just go to documentation, and you will also get that whole information. But the basic idea is we need the MQTT broker so that we can from our application send data into the Greengrass deployment.
Okay.
Right. And then we also need client device auth, which is again just for the whole authentication that we can properly send data into that container, and that Greengrass can make sure that every data that's coming in there is actually from the devices that are supposed to send data in enough from somewhere else on the network.
Okay, so if I understand that correctly, I generate some data with that type of sensor. It's going over IO link into the edge gateway here.
Correct.
And then I have some kind of data, and you install the MQTT broker there, and then get those data from the CloudRail application into some other application, and I process it.
Correct. So yeah, the CloudRail application, as you said, is acquiring the data from the industrial sensors or from the industrial hardware in general. It pre-processes it, it brings it into a JSON format, and then it sends it into that MQTT broker from Greengrass.
Okay.
And from there, you can then basically direct it to any component that you have deployed, or simply direct it to IoT Core in the clouds.
Okay.
You could simply go through Greengrass. So what we can do now is also set up this exact use case. So what we will do is we will search for the MQTT components. So there are 2 that we need. So this is the MQTT bridge, and we need the MQTT broker was cat down here. What else do we need? We need client auth, just down here. And yeah, I think that's it. Let's try this out. So we go next. Now we still have to configure them. So again, for the use case that we're talking about, that we just want to send the data up, we also need to provide a bit of configuration, which we can do very briefly here. And then again, you can just go to the documentation to figure this out, but we'll quickly go through this without talking too much about what it's doing exactly. So you just select the component, you go to configure, you can basically provide the configuration that we have on our documentation. Confirm, go to the next one, configure the component. Again, go over here and copy the one that we have. This one doesn't need one, so we just need client device off. Okay. Client device off, configure component, provide this in here, confirm. Okay, so these 2 have been configured. So just to double check, device off, MQTT bridge. Let's go next. Next again. We just get the summary of everything that we want to deploy, and we can go ahead and deploy it.
What happens now?
So now AWS will send a message to its Greengrass instance with all the components that we are asking it to deploy and with all the configuration. So that component on there will also have a link to where it's getting it from, right? So it's now downloading these and trying to get it up and running, right? And test if everything is properly supplied in the configuration and nothing is missing and so forth, right? So it's just a way to ensure that, all the deployments or all the components that you specified in the deployment are actually going to be there and are actually going to run.
Okay, cool.
Perfect. So if we check this out, it has failed for some reason.
Sometimes happens, or?
Sometimes it does. But let's see, it could be again that we're missing one component.
I see you're working with your own manual.
Yeah, that usually helps. Oh yeah, I forgot to deploy the nucleus. So usually sometimes it needs the latest version, so we always have to deploy the nucleus together with the other things that we're trying to deploy. So
okay.
If I just add that, I think it should work the next time around. So we just go through it again.
And we also don't need to configure the nucleus.
Correct. No, there's nothing to. The nucleus is basically the single thing that needs to run always on the device, and that's kind of interacting with the AWS side.
Okay.
So it can happen. That's why I like to also. It's good that we ran into this issue because this is something that can happen as well. If it's not on the latest version already, it sometimes complains that that you need to install it. So if the 3 components that we have in there aren't enough, you always have to deploy the nucleus. So currently this is deploying, and it's probably going to take a few minutes to complete.
Okay, great. I see.
Yes.
Well, deployment status completed. What happens next?
Now, we see it's completed. We can just double check it real quick. So if you go to the core devices and select your Welotec device again, you can double check that all the components that you have a running status or a finished status. So Nucleus usually has finished and the others should be on running state, which they are. So that's a good sign. Now we can go back to the device management platform and we get the same information here, by the way. So in our latest version, you will also see the deployment status. You can even go into the V2 components. So I probably have to reload this. Yes, and
cool.
You will also get the same list of the components that you wanted to run, and you can also see that directly from here, which usually helps when you're debugging something. So yeah, all is set up. Now what we can do is actually configure a device. So we go to new connection, directly connected sensors. Now we should immediately see the Owlink master. We have a tower light up here and we have the vibration sensor on port 6. Now we select the vibration sensor. We go next, we specify an interval. So in this case, let's just do 500 milliseconds. Go next. Now, instead of setting IoT Core directly, we now choose IoT Greengrass.
Okay.
Now, again, this will ensure that we're not directly sending it into the cloud, but we're sending it to the MQTT broker that's coming with Greengrass or that we have just deployed as a component. Now we give this a name and we hit create. So again, same as with the other direct connections to IoT Core, we first create the device and we now send down the credentials connected to the local MQTT broker. And that broker is, through the configuration that we have provided, configured in a way that it will just automatically forward all the data coming in into IoT Core. So we're still getting the same answer basically from IoT Core, right? It's just data coming in there, but it's going through the local Greengrass instance first. So yeah, we see the data schema as usual, and we also see a data set.
Okay. So
now we can go.
I can see it here.
Stop playing around, but here not, right? So we have to copy the topic. We go back to IoT Core. We go to the test client and put in this topic here. And we subscribe to it, and there we go. We also see the data coming in onto IoT Core.
Yeah, it's a great vibration sensor, so you see.
So you can also touch it and you can see the data changing immediately here. Perfect. So yeah, obviously, if you now want to run some computation on these devices, you would have to deploy your own components or work with some additional components if you want to pull in data for maybe protocols that we don't support out of the box, but that are there on Greengrass or available.
Okay, amazing, cool.
Perfect. So yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you as well.